older persons in that area. She's also the vice chair of Common Age and Global Age. And she is incredibly long-standing experience. I think she told me 27 years experience in the broader sector and area. So we're excited to hear from her today. Alongside Famada, we have Siwa Toto. For some of you who are from UCT, you might recognize him, you might know his name. He is at the School of Public Health and the Faculty of Health Sciences. He is trained as an OT and has been working with alongside GAPA, the Grandparents Against Poverty Action Group there here in Cape Town for several years, he tells me, but he's also on the board of management there over the last 2 or 3 years. So welcome to both of you. Today, we are looking at the relationship between policy, research and advocacy, particularly in the relation of care and older persons, but not exclusively, needless to say. I suppose we're interested in hearing from your experiences and obviously things you've learned along the way of how that, I suppose, the translation, the coordination of research into evidence and policy and the mobilizing of agendas in getting particular issues on the like government, with in the NPO, in the broader sector. So what we'll do is you both have about, is it 15, 20 minutes is okay? And we'll do the 2 talks consecutive, like one after the other, and we'll hold off for questions until the end, and then we'll open up. We've got about 20 minutes then for questions. Right, great. So I don't know who wants to start. Famada, do you want to start? Or Siwa, do you want to start?
Sure. I thought Famada was starting.
Okay, Famada, you start. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want to share your slides. I know Veda has a copy of them, but I'll hand it over to you. Thanks, Famada.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. So I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's see if I can do this. Technology. There we go. I'm going to get there. Sorry, guys. Just give me 1 second.
Don't worry.
Worries.
Yeah, I've got multiple screens open, so make sure they get the right. That's the one. Okay, so I assume, yeah, you can see the one with the spelling of my name all incorrect. This was done in the middle of the night, so I apologize for that already. But I thought perhaps I'd just title this as Weaving the Tapestry of Support. Looking at researchers and practitioners creating an enabling environment for older persons, because I think ultimately that's what we want to do, irrespective of the role we play. We sort of pulling towards a common purpose, which is to ensure that we have a world which is responsive to the needs of older persons, and every one of us have a different role to play. And I thought perhaps I would start off with maybe the TAFTA story, because I think our learnings are rooted in our narratives. So I'm just going to take a moment or two just to talk about where we are as an organization. We are 65 years old, and over the last 6.5 decades, we have been providing services that are rooted in our purpose, which is to make dignity, growth, and a meaningful life a realistic prospect for all older people. And this means different things to different people, but essentially these 3 aspects are things that drive the work that we do. And our journey through the 65 years has not just been about passing of time, it's been about the impact that we make and the relationships we forge and the lessons that we learn. And at TAFTA, I think one of the biggest lessons we've learned is the power of collaboration, because TAFTA cannot be all things to all people. And we recognize that by strengthening our bonds with our care partners and embracing evidence-based practices, we amplify our impact and we pave the way for positive change in the lives of our older people. So it's really about, I think when we think about this relationship with the family caregiving program, it's about testing our assumptions that we make about older persons and really having the evidence for the statements that we make. So I think, Alina, in engaging with you and your team, very often I find myself stop and asking myself, is that the truth? Is that really how it is? And I think that's the power of the collaboration. It makes you pause and consider and think about whether there's other aspects that we need to be considering and investigating as well. Our involvement with the family caregiving program, not project, I think has some humble beginnings. We were introduced to Alina through a colleague of ours, and I think I put that in specifically because I think when we start considering the the collaboration aspect, we realize it is about relationships, and it's relationships that we forge over a number of years. I was introduced to Alina by Professor Jaco Hoffman, and I think at that time Alina was doing some submission, and she was looking for an NGO partner and someone from the department, and Jaco had submitted my details. And over the years, we've kind of had conversations around different things. But I think the reason I bring up where it started is because when you start collaborating, you're not quite sure what the end game is. You just know that you have a common interest, and here is someone who potentially could journey with you because your values and your vision is the same. And I think that's so important when we start looking at collaboration. I think from our humble beginnings, we've stood alongside caregivers, researchers, practitioners, sharing stories, gathering evidence, and making a difference. And through this journey, we've learned a couple of important lessons. I think the first thing we've learned is engagement is a two-way street, and that's so important. It can't be that when you look at collaboration, there's someone that collaborates more than the other. It has to when we look at the potential partnerships and collaboration, there's benefit for both the researchers as well as the practitioners, ultimately enhancing the lives of older persons. The second kind of lesson that we learned from the collaboration is that success often emerges from embracing the unknown and learning from our failures and respecting each other's perspectives. Murphy's Law, whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And I think we have to have this deep faith that the relationship and that journey will take us to a place where we need to be at that particular point in time. It may not be how we had envisaged it at the outset, but it does take us to the right place. The kind of third lesson that we learned was this issue around flexibility and resilience are the non-negotiables. So I think whenever you go into a partnership and you're looking at collaboration, flexibility has to be the non-negotiable because things change and we have to be able to embrace that change. And the last one that I brought in was that this idea that everyone brings value to the table. And I reflected on a very impactful article that I had read many years ago. It was called "In Praise of the Incomplete Leader," and it's based on this thinking that leaders in today's society are under immense pressure to be all things to all people. You're supposed to be perfect. You have all the answers. All the things that you need to know, and the rest of it. But I think that this particular article says that we accept that we have certain limitations, and the strength in true leadership is knowing where your limitations are and then surrounding yourself with people who can make up for those limitations and who can add value. So I think collaboration and partnerships add to this ethos around the incomplete leader. And when you start thinking about ways in which you can reach out in terms of the partnership and collaboration, these are some of the things you need to think about. I think when I was thinking about what I would like to share with you today, let me just be good. Sorry. Sometimes my computer, there we go. Let's talk about weaving this tapestry now. Oh, there you go. I think when I was thinking about what I want to share, I thought about, how do we bridge this divide between research and practice? Because that's so important. Very often we've seen it as silos, practitioners doing their thing at grassroots level, researchers within the academic environment, a whole lot of stuff. But I think as we endeavor to create an environment that really supports and empowers older persons, we must recognize the indispensable contributions of researchers and practitioners. And yeah, I'm going to use the imagery around tapestry because I think it's quite powerful and it brings across my point quite clearly. I think like threads in a rich tapestry, each partner plays a unique role in this intricate design of a society where our older individuals can flourish with dignity and fulfillment. And when we start looking at the relationship, I think in this fabric of social change, researchers and practitioners are threads woven together to form a cohesive whole. Researchers provide the warp, grounding the tapestry in evidence-based knowledge and analysis, while practitioners contribute to the weft, interlacing community engagement and advocacy efforts. Both add to the vibrant hues, infusing the tapestry with passion and drive. And together they create the support, the resilience, and these kinds of things actually stands the test of time. I want to quickly go through maybe some of the principles I thought are important when we're looking at collaboration, so that there's some definite takeouts in terms of my input. I think the first thing we learned was around open and transparent communication. And I think just as the threads in any study fabric need to be intertwined, open communication is essential when weaving together the efforts of the researchers and practitioners. And here things like regular exchanges of information, updates, and ideas serve as these threads that bind the partnership, ensuring alignment to our objectives and shared understanding. And I think, within the context of the TAFTA Family Caregiving Program, relationship, this has been done quite beautifully with the updates that comes through from Alina and the team, whether it is the emails that comes through on the social media pages, all the publications. So the academic aspect around the program is not foreign to the audience that we serve as well. So it makes it more relatable. And it also makes the information very useful. Since the publication of the various reports, I've actually used Alina's or the Family Caregiving Program's reports on a number of platforms, whether it is talking about ageism, whether it's trying to advocate for resources based on the statistics that Alina and the team have come up with. I found it exceptionally useful in having conversations with people. And I think, that's the value in terms of evidence-based. When you are able to prove and attach the numbers to the narrative, it makes it far more powerful than just saying this is an idea that I have. The second aspect around collaboration, I think this idea around mutual respect and trust. Respect forms the foundation upon which trust is built, and strengthens the bonds between all stakeholders. Researchers respect the grassroots knowledge, and the nonprofit organizations and practitioners trust that the researchers provide accurate data and analysis. And this mutual respect fosters a collaborative spirit, enhancing the integrity and cohesion of the partnership. And again, I can use the information that Alina and her team has come up with confidence, knowing that it is rooted in scientific practice, knowing that the information is useful to support the narratives and to support the advocacy efforts that I engage in on different platforms. The third aspect is around clearly defined roles and responsibilities. And I think just as each thread has a designated place in the tapestry, clear roles and responsibilities delineate the contributions of each partner. Researchers focus on generating evidence, and practitioners look at things such as advocacy and community engagement, um, as well as mobilizing support and driving change. And I think, maybe Alina started off with that kind of comment that, when we start thinking about the collaboration, how does it impact on change? How does it impact on mobilizing support? And I think when we are able to match the narrative to the statistics and the evidence, it becomes a far more powerful advocacy effort than each one on its own. And I think when we start thinking about the roles and the responsibilities, if we are able to define this, the partnership avoids duplication of effort and maximizes efficiency. The fourth aspect that I think perhaps we need to be thinking about is this issue around decision making. And I think this tapestry of support is enriched by diverse perspectives and voices. Inclusive decision making ensures that all stakeholders have a seat at the loom, contributing their insights and expertise. And by embracing this inclusivity, the partnership strengthens its resilience and relevance, um, making sure that it reflects the needs and aspirations of all older persons from all walks of life. And I think it also makes sure that whatever efforts we put in is takes cognizance of the changing and evolving needs of older persons. I think we saw this very clearly when we had the community engagement in Wentworth. We had a far greater turnout than we anticipated, but everyone wanted a seat at the table and everyone wanted their voice to be heard. And I think that was captured quite beautifully with the reports that came out there that pulled through the main themes so that we could look at points of intervention and ways that we could move forward. The next aspect, I think, in terms of the collaboration is the capacity building and knowledge sharing. And this is critical because I think, like, skilled weavers who are honing their craft, stakeholders engage in capacity building and knowledge sharing to enhance their collective impact. I've certainly learned quite a lot from Alina and the team, as has my team members as well. Researchers share their findings in accessible formats, and here I must absolutely mention the manner in which the reports were put together. It made it so user friendly, and it was such an excellent way of disseminating information. It's the combination of the narrative, the visuals, the infographics, which makes it user friendly on different platforms, not just for academic purposes, but also for general public consumption. And I think practitioners, when we start thinking about how they lend to this idea around capacity building and knowledge sharing, I think practitioners brings the context-specific insights and grassroots perspectives. And these exchanges of knowledge enriches the partnership, enabling it to adapt and evolve in response to changing circumstances. The last principle, I think, was around adequate funding and resources. And no tapestry can be woven without the necessary materials and tools, and adequate funding and resources are essential for sustaining the partnership, supporting the research, supporting the community engagement efforts as well. And when I talk about resources, it's not just in terms of financial, it's about the human resources and it's about the time. I think whenever we look at advocacy, lobbying, partnerships with stakeholders, we must be able to allocate the time to that relationship in order to see the benefit ultimately for older persons. And the next aspect, I think, is around recognition and acknowledgement. Every thread in the tapestry has its own unique beauty and significance, and recognition and acknowledgement of each partner's contributions are essential for fostering a culture of appreciation and collaboration. Researchers acknowledge the impact of practitioners in shaping policies and improving the lives of older persons, while I think that from the NPO sector, certainly from a practitioner perspective, there's an appreciation of the role of researchers in providing evidence-based insights. And I think this mutual recognition strengthens the bonds and partnership. And I think when we start off from a place of trust and respect and a recognition of the value that each person brings to the table, it only strengthens the relationship moving forward.
Hi folks, I'm not sure if we lost Famada or if that was the last slide. I'm just looking to see if she's still in the room. Famada, are you there?
I don't see her.
Did lose her.
Yeah, I think we lost her for a bit. I know it was not patchy, but it was a bit fragmented in pieces, and that's why I think I turned my camera off, and others did too. I do think she was nearing the end.
Yeah,
I know
there was one more slide. Just
there was
one.
Oh, is it one more slide? What we can do is we can just give it a minute, perhaps, and just to see if she logs back on or comes back in. If not, we will move on. Just because I know she will try. She'll message me if there is a problem. So yeah, let's just give it a minute. And I think when you speak, I'll also turn off my camera just for the same reason, to keep the connection strong for everyone, if that's okay.
All right.
Hi, Fameta, you're back with us. You're on mute. I'll hand back over to you. I know you're probably towards the end anyway, but I'm delighted to see you back.
Okay, so did I just do the whole presentation to myself? Okay, I apologize.
No, we got everything. It's only that you're on the last principle of collaboration, and I think you were coming to the end of it, and then you probably have, Veda tells me you've got one more slide left.
Okay, yeah. So I think I was just talking about these kind of 7 principles that sort of guided the collaboration, and the end result was that different people were able to bring different things to the table. And what it does is that it adequately captures the stories of our older persons, while at the same time it gives us the necessary tools in order to advocate and to lobby, and to ensure that there's the sort of macro level changes that needs to happen, so that at the micro level we can continue to provide the services that we need to provide. So I think I'm going to stop there. Okay, so I've got over my 20 minutes. I do apologize for time. Sorry.
No, that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Madam. Thanks for sharing all of that, and thanks. I mean, it always comes off so smoothly and coherent. I hope you weren't doing this at midnight last night, as you said. But thanks for sharing. Yeah, all the principles of collaboration. I'm gonna hand over to Siwa, to hear from his work and his contributions to the seminar. Thanks, Siwa. I'll turn off my camera as well.
All right. Thank you so much. So I'm sharing my screen. Please let me know if you can see it.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, we can.
All right. Perfect. So thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Vuisiwe Toto. I'm an occupational therapist, and I'm presenting part of a study that I did for my own master's, and it was on African dance. And some of the findings that came out there have really helped me to shape today's presentation around this area of caring for the elderly in our communities. So I want to share some observations that came out of this study, particularly those that have a bearing on decolonial scholarship and theorizing, especially in the context of health and well-being, where we find ourselves. And lastly, just to really contribute to the validation of healing practices for historically oppressed people, particularly in South Africa. So you'll see on the screen, you have a photo. It's from some of my participants. They are part of a dance company called Subondaba. And I like what it says, if our ancestors could speak, because it relates to a bit of what I'm going to cover today. And so the study itself, you can find it online. It's under the title, The Nature and Enactment of African Dance That Produces Neurogenic Tremors. Just want to say the pictures that you see, I have sourced them and asked for permission from the actual participants in this study. And my acknowledgements are on the side for each one of them. And they asked specifically to be named. So in many of our research protocols, we often use pseudonyms and anonymize, but they said this is their knowledge and they would want a record of it. Sorry, let me just minimize there so I can see everything. All right. Now my slides are stuck. Okay, so the first thing is that this research came because I was concerned about the levels of chronic stress that South Africans face, in particular those who live in underserviced areas or those who are in marginalized groups, such as the elderly, in townships and in rural areas. So one of the most famous definitions of stress is that it is a response that an organism registers and to a real or a perceived threat. And usually it can contribute and even worsen subclinical symptoms, such as, for example, your heart disease, your stroke, your diabetes. And even if you have other conditions, such as, your mental health disorders, it can exacerbate these. And if you don't have those already, it can lead to serious disease. But what makes it very difficult is that we're unable to really report on the prevalence of stress. As you know, everybody has been stressed and is stressed in various ways. And there's a lot of factors that add to that stress. But often the interventions that we give as health professionals usually are decontextualized. For example, we know that yoga and psychotherapy and cognitive behavioral therapy are very useful interventions in dealing with stress. But often these come from contexts where our grannies aren't able to, use them. So it would be remiss of any therapist in the country, for example, working with the elderly in rural or areas or in peri-urban areas to say, Granny, I'm going to give you a yoga plan. Let's just do yoga and your stress will be fine. Because first of all, it's not culturally relevant. It's not appropriate, even though we know it works. And so sometimes we do have interventions that do really work and might be culturally relevant, but often they are very expensive, or the people that can run these kinds of interventions are few and far in between. For example, for South Africa, we have 60 million people, and we only have 6,221 OTs on public and private in the country. So it really tells you that the big problems that we're facing. And so you find that those that have access to these often have money and are in urban and advanced areas. So which means the majority of South Africans don't have this thing. So I don't think I have enough time. When I was planning, I thought I'd have time to be able to play these videos, but I'm happy to play them at the end if people are interested. But really, they just explain or set the scene for what African dance is. So I was interested in African dance that produces neurogenic tremors. This comes from, this is the backstory. I was very stressed in 2017 to a point where I needed some therapy. So my thesis supervisor also happens to be a registered therapist, gave me an intervention called TRE, trauma release exercise. Now, trauma release exercise, when it is done properly, it releases stress through inducing involuntary rapid shaking of the body, particularly the torso and the limbs. And so when this started happening to me, it reminded me of fond memories of my own grandmother. She was a dance teacher amongst many things that she did in her life. And she used to bring together all the children and teenagers in our village. I'm from the Eastern Cape, former Transkei. And there we would do these dances. And obviously, when we were children, we didn't really understand. But when I did this session, I realized, because it worked, and I realized, oh man, I have done something like this. And it might be that we can find it in an already existing occupation. And so this is how African dance that produces neurogenic tremors, in short, ADNT, came about, or how I conceptualized it. Now, neurogenic tremors, you might ask. Neurogenic tremors are those mild, rhythmic, involuntary muscle oscillations or shakes that are usually activated by by a response to a stressful situation. For example, I know Elena hikes a lot, so if you happen to be, I don't know if you are, maybe somebody in the audience is, have hiked, and then you get to a point where the heights are a little scary. Usually then your knees might start shaking, or, so those are neurogenic tremors. And they aren't necessarily pathological, but really they are there to release the stress. So they are responding to a stressful situation. So this occupation allows that to happen. So, but I wanted to also just quickly explain what I mean by occupation, because the word can be ambiguous. Now, human occupation refers to things that are ordinary and things that are extraordinary that people do every day. For example, being able to take care of yourself and your family is an ordinary and extraordinary thing to do, depending on the context. Or giving birth, raising children, being an activist and fighting, those are things that people do every day. And usually those things are meaningful. So in other words, they find them valuable, they find them worthwhile, they find them important, even if those things are not psychologically rewarding or enjoyable. Now, we also talk about human occupation as that which is done. So it has both the subjective and the objective realities. So when we talk about that which is done, we're talking about the values underlying what we do and why we do it, but also the environment, so the objective parts. And then the active doing is really the performance itself, the action. So I wanted to know what the action is, but also the background behind why people do this dance and what it gives them. And then another thing that I want to talk about is collective occupation. And that's perhaps very important for today's talk around how we can do together, and how grannies, so I keep saying grannies, I'm so sorry. I am in GAPA, Grandmothers Against Poverty and AIDS, and also having very fond or a passion really for the elderly and the aged. Then lastly, occupation itself, we know as occupational therapists, has a relationship between health and well-being. We know that what people do will impact their experience of health and their status of health, just as what people do not do will also impact the health and well-being that they enjoy. So African dance here, I went in with the idea that it could be a source of healing. And this, of course, would go beyond what we study in health sciences, that is biomedicine, to include aspects of spirituality. So in my talk, I do speak about the different aspects of health, which I want to cover with you. So the methodology I used was social constructivism in terms of the paradigm, where we are co-creating and co-researching. So I treated the dancers, they were professional dancers, as people who know what they are doing, people who also understand how they want the knowledge that they are now embodying and expressing to be written about. I used a case study because this is a previously undocumented phenomenon. and I'll explain that a little later. And you'll see here under data collection, I have scratched out participant observation. That's what literature calls it. But actually, I would argue that it's more around participating in the research and contributing, whereas we are often told to remove ourselves a little bit because we might introduce bias, and we might what's the word, sully the findings. But actually, we ourselves, when we collaborate, we do add something there, and I think it's worthwhile to also recognize those contributions that we make. So these are some of the themes that came out. For example, they explained to me when these neurogenic tremors happen during the dance, after the dance, even in their own homes. They also explain the values that are connected to them, so the essence of self and embodying Africa and its values through dance. They explained transcendence, and I want to speak to that a little bit. And they also explain their connection to the earth, to the ground, and to other sources of reality. And I'll also explain that in the next bit. But I just wanted to give you a taster. This is them in practice here. And there's some codes on the side if you want to read. I will share the slides at the end. I'm just also a little worried about time. So yes, this is just what happened during those days. Now, the findings, this is really the meat of the discussion, and this is what I really wanted to bring to your attention. Firstly, they speak about ubuwena, that when they dance, it gives them ubuwena, or they can really understand themselves better. Now, ubuwena refers to the essence of self. It is also very much connected to spirituality. And I used Professor Mokgobe Ramos's approach to understanding some key concepts in African languages. So he usually divides words into their constituent meanings. Now, ubuwena, when you divide it into two, it gives you what you see in the second bullet there. So UBU, ubu, it always means to be, to become, and to embody. And wena is you or yourself. So then ubuwena means being, becoming, and embodying who you are. And then the other thing that really came out strongly was this sense of Ubuntu between the dancers. And Ubuntu, we have understood as a profound veneration of that which is human in everybody else. And again, using Ramos's approach to understanding this. In fact, this one is directly borrowed from his work in a published book in 2002, where he says Ubuntu is about being and becoming more human with others. Then another one that came out very strongly from the participants was Isintu. Now, Isintu is the neglected twin of Ubuntu. They are two sides of the same coin, really. Whereas Ubuntu is about value and valuing, it's a philosophy and principles. Isintu is a way of doing things. It is the practical realization of Ubuntu. So again, following that same tradition where you go to the constituent parts of this language, is that ISI, and I'm sure you've seen this, like for example, isiXhosa, isiNdu, isiZulu, isiNdebele, it usually denotes language, custom, manner of doing something, or a fashion of doing something. So isiNtu then becomes the language of doing, of human beings, or in simple ways, the way of the people, or how people do things. Then lastly, I want to speak also a lot about occupational consciousness, which is a concept that has been written and coined by Professor Elirwane Ramugondo, where it's a mental attitude to resist in your everyday acts, what you do against things that might colonize us or things that might oppress us. And so the other part is transcendence, and I'm almost at the last bit. I'm so sorry if I'm taking a little too much time. So
Don't worry.
transcendence.
Feel
All
free to
right.
go on. We're all
Okay.
listening attentively, so please take the time.
All right, perfect. And another layer that came out was this experience of rising above the self and beyond material existence in pursuit of well-being. And I want to explain that a little further. But first, I also want to speak to eudaimonic occupation, which is something that we are just beginning to study in my field. And this really refers to occupations that are inherently promoting of human flourishing. And so you have sort of different things, like centering of self, contemplation, connectedness, creativity, and contribution. They don't all have to happen at the same time. But usually older people will really understand this, right? And we'll speak to it in my next slide. No. Yes, second slide. So firstly, what I understood was that this is an extraordinary occupation. It has so many layers. It also contributes to people's physical health. Literally, when they dance, they are shaking off their stress. You see, African dance uses a lot of stomping, which creates some pressure against the ground, and that can release some dopamine and dopaminergic hormones. It also is about mental health. So this thing that I mentioned here around a centering of the self or connecting to the ground is this idea that there are repetitive acts or repetitive actions that we can take in our everyday life to declutter our mind. Personally, I like cleaning the house. It's very repetitive, sweeping, you're just doing one motion, but you can find it to be therapeutic. Hiking or walking can also do that because you're not really doing high level thinking. It's just getting you back to the here and now. And then there's, of course, contemplation and creativity. Now, from some of the things that I got was this challenge around cosmology, and in particular, how we as Western society have understood time and space. And I'll come back. So it's just a list of the findings, but I'll explain them now. In one go. Then something else that really captured my attention is this idea that the dance itself is not healing to those who perform it only. It also is in those that are participating. And the participation, if you've ever watched a performance of African dance, it's very hard not to clap along or to tap along and to be engaged. And so they also explain that. Now, this is what I really wanted to present today. So in research, we often speak about three main things, but in some instances, some people even list four: your ontology, epistemology, cosmology, and methodology, right? Now, I've given some definitions for those standpoints. For example, cosmology is really interested in the relationships and interrelations between phenomena that occur in a universe or the nature of the universe. But when you look at African dance, and African dance is couched within African cosmology. So they help me really understand so much. Firstly, they dispute the word Africa, saying that Africa is not even an African language. The term Africa doesn't come from an African language. And so we have this name of this continent that has been used in many respects, widely accepted as is, but actually is not an African a language term, if that makes sense. So in isiXhosa, Africa is Kwantu. Now, Kwa, KWA, usually denotes time, it denotes direction, and it denotes ownership. And so when we are saying Kwantu, what we are really saying is where humanity finds itself, where humanity comes from, and where humanity might be going. So its direction, its time, and its ownership. And so you'll see, I say it has, when you use Kwantu, then it already puts into your mind temporal dimensions of our space, socio-historical, cultural, and ontological dimensions, which might be missing from just Africa, right? Now, the reason I also put this up here is because cosmology, in the way that Western science has understood it, is that it is about the physicality of the universe, and that there's only one universe and nothing comparable to it. Whereas in the African understanding, or if you use African viewpoints, there is this connection that they use between themselves and their ancestors, right? And here, ancestors aren't a religion. So there's no belief in ancestors. Rather, it is a lived experience. So it's something that is part of their reality, and they are connecting with their ancestors. So then the question is, we need to think about African cosmology from that perspective. Now you have people who connect with their ancestors. Then the question is, if we are to accept that ancestors are real and form part of reality, then how many realities are really there? Or is how we've understood reality enough and adequate to explain everything that happens in the world in the way that we see it? But two, around the linearity of time. How we have understood time is that time advances only forward, that you can never go back to the past. You can think and reflect on it, learn from it, but certainly we're always going to the past, and that time is apocalyptic. So there's this judgment day that we're all waiting for that will happen at some point. And we've seen this, in movies, in the Bible, in many other religious texts. But from an African point of view, that becomes a little murky, because now you've got these real living entities that are no longer alive, or the living dead, as how some people call them. When you connect with them and communicate with them and commune with them, then suddenly time can no longer be understood as linear, because then that it either means they have to come forward to where their descendants are to communicate with them, or the living have to go into the past and communicate with their ancestors. How this showed up in the research was that they said when they dance, they go into a trance, and in the trance, sometimes they can see some of their ancestors, and sometimes they can tell that this is one of their family members, but they'd never met them. And so they go confirm with older people to say, hey, do you know someone like this? And they describe him. And usually the older person will say, yes, this is Uncle so-and-so. He used to live here. And they also sometimes will go into a trance and see performances and choreographies. In fact, the choreographer of this school writes down everything after her trances, and then they perform that. They're usually at Artscape Theatre, if you're interested. Then the other thing around ontology. Ontology we understand as helping us to ask questions about reality. But if we just ask about reality in terms of objective phenomena and forget about humans, we might not understand what reality is. Whereas here, when we understand Ubuntu as a process of being and a process of becoming and about embodying that which is human, then we can even start understanding, for example, the viewpoints of Africans, that there are these ancestors there that they communicate with and other sources and powers that sort of your Western understanding of science cannot resolve. We cannot simply disprove spirituality, but at the same time, we cannot prove it. But if you use African understandings of these research standpoints, then it becomes wider, right? Then the next one was epistemology, which is really concerned with truth. Is there truth out there? Is there one truth? How many truths are there? Or knowledge? And how do we know what we know? And how do we validate what we know? So again, here, they said when they dance, it gives them a sense of their selves and a knowledge of themselves and an opportunity to learn a little more about who they are, which is how they've defined it as ubuwena, being, becoming, and embodying who you have always meant to be. And that when they really get into that point, that is when they start enacting and embodying the values of Africa. For example, Ubuntu, like when they are dancing together, they are also caretaking, like in terms of the stress that they might face. So, for example, in the rehearsal space, they often share very painful experiences that they go through. Maybe they were mugged on their way to the dance school, or a death in the family, or sickness. And so when they dance together, they're also dancing in a way that holds them. And they say this is what they have learned from their ancestors. And also this dance that they are dancing, they have also gotten it from their elder population, your grandparents. And then lastly, methodology is now that we understand the other standpoints, we need a way to go do these things, right? Or to study them. So Isintu is one such way that I think we can start understanding phenomena that happen in African contexts better, because it's really about doing here. If, for example, there's someone who goes through illness, and then they go to a doctor, they go to a specialist, they go many times, but it's unresolved. Usually, their last resort is to go to a sangoma and to ask what's happening. And if the sangoma themselves say, I don't know, the last resort is to go to the elder people and ask, what should we do? And their answer is always the same. Asenze ngesintu, what does isintu say when we have such a situation? So isintu then is not just a language, as some people have called it, but it is a living history, a living archive, because we are taught how to do these things from a young age in our home context. And this is what then gives rise to occupational consciousness. So as I said, occupational consciousness really is in the everyday acts, in the small things, how you do things, and thinking about, if I do this dance, what opportunities will I get and what might I be losing? So for example, I asked all of them, as like, you're professional dancers. Why didn't you go study ballet or modern dance, or contemporary, which is far more lucrative? And they said the world already behaves in a Western way. And for us, African dance keeps us grounded. It confirms who we are. And this is why we do it every day. It is a resistive act. And usually when people go for these kinds of performances to watch, it's for entertainment. But for them, they said it's about rewriting history, reliving history, reenacting history, but also about healing their participants. So this is research that I think we can also now think about. Oh, sorry, I wanted to say, you see there's a little arrow on the hand here. This is just to say, even though I have these 4 concepts that I've listed, they are, you can mash them in any way. You can talk about Kwantu in the context of ontology, or in the context of epistemology, or even in methodology. So they are fluid, right? They aren't these defined ones, but I just thought for the purposes of today's presentations, just to present them in this way. So if we can start listening to populations about how they have thought about their own issues, we can start learning far deeper insights. Because when I went in to study this, really, I just wanted to understand the physiological and the biomechanical part of this dance. Did not expect that I would be getting the metaphysical and the spiritual aspects to health that this intergenerational tool has given them. I think I want to stop there, and then I'm happy to discuss. Oh, I have also given you a video you can watch at home. It's a very powerful performance by Kofi Koko, one of the greatest African dance teachers alive. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Iwa. Sure, you have given us so much there. And I think, I know there's going to be questions. I know we're out of time, but we're going to go over. Obviously, if people have to leave, by all means, leave, do so. Hopefully, Slua, you can stay for a minute or two, or a bit longer, and everyone else.
I'm here.
Some of your final points you've taken us through, and I know there's people in this room who are working with the similar concepts. I see Vanessa in the room; she's doing her PhD and working with some of this material. But what I wanted to say is, you finished off there by saying, if we listen to people, and we hear and we take seriously how what matters, and how people understand their position, whether it's the health or whether it's social, then we probably get to a different point in policy and recommendations and all of these ways of supporting, basically, is what it boils down to, than when we don't, essentially.
Right.
And often what we see in policy is a kind of a copycat affair. A particular country has policies like this, and so the next country will copy it and refine, copy, refine, and tweak. What we very rarely see is a starting again. Like, where are we? What are we? How do we begin to support? So I'm very, very excited about hearing more about how these are the starting points, actually, and what can come from there. I see there are hands up. Famad, I think you had your hand up. I want to open it up to everyone. If there's any comments or questions for both our speakers. Sorry, Famad, I know you had your hand up there.
Yeah, I was just reflecting on what he was saying, and I think it talks to your point around people tell their stories in different ways, and we've become so accustomed to the narrative that comes from our education system. This is how we gather information, but through other forms of expression, we probably can get far richer content that is very applicable to the lived experiences of the people whom we work with. So I thank you. I think it was such a fascinating presentation, and it really does talk to us thinking about the manner in which we practice as well, and the manner in which we gather information. Generally when we interviewing, we will do it as a conversation, but perhaps people attach meaning to different things, and we need to understand how we can get information from those expressions of their life as well. So yeah, I think it's been very, very interesting hearing about your research.
Thank you so much.
I see Vanessa. I think there's Vanessa who has a hand up. Go ahead, Vanessa. Oh, you can't unmute. Do you want to type it maybe?
I think somebody else has to unmute her.
I'm going to sort that out now, sorry.
Let us know when you're in, Vanessa. You can keep talking in the background.
Okay, it should be sorted now.
Mhm.
It is indeed sorted.
Hi, Vanessa.
Hi. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to both the presenters. Really, I really appreciated the conversation and the thought-provoking contribution. So I of course naturally somewhat have questions for Siwe. Thank you so much. I really got quite excited when you started really unpacking what you had found in your work. And so earlier in the week, I attended a kind of book launch by Uhuru Palafala, who's a senior English literature scholar at Stellenbosch. And one of the things that she was mentioning, how she got to write the book she was writing, she said she had to learn to listen. And she said she had to learn to listen to her grandfather, who has now passed away. But he basically came to her and offered his story to her of his life in the mines and, you know, him having problems with his lungs and so on and so forth. And I was wondering if a similar thing was expressed by your participants. And if in any way, and I know you've mentioned a little bit, but maybe you can go a little bit deeper with that. You've mentioned as well, and if any of them mentioned as seeing themselves and making themselves, so in other words, part of Ubuntu Babo is in kind of bridging or being a bridge between those that have passed on and those that exist, and if and those that are still living, and if that conversation for them as well through movement is not only invoked, right, but also there is some answering that happens through movement as well to whatever questions that might exist, you know, of the universe, of being, of reality, of, you know, figuring out life moving forward, what to do with, on this side of the grave, that kind of thing. So I'm really wondering if that came through at all, and how. Yes, and if your participants framed themselves and part of their being as being the mediators or the bridge, and then also to that is, I mean, what do they do with that? You know, I hope that's clear. Thanks again for your work.
All right. Thanks, Vanessa. Elena, I don't know if I should answer one at a time or handle a few.
No, please do take them now. I mean, I see there's also a comment in the chat as well. Maybe you can, if you can see it. I don't know if you can see it. Otherwise, I can read it out.
I think it's more for Femada, but I do see it, yes.
Okay.
So thanks, Vanessa, for that. Actually, I think what you've just shared from Uhuru's side and some of the stuff that I learned from the dance, the dancers connected, right? But what they did say, and they're very emphatic on this point, is that they themselves don't have any special powers. They aren't mediators. They said that very, very clearly. In fact, because when I asked, do you see yourself as healers? Because you said the dance that you perform heals your audience. And they said they are not healers. They are not mediators, but what they do is the actual mediator, and that what they do can be transferred from one generation to the other. So, for example, her name's Tandeka. So she says she had never met her grandmother, and she had been struggling to get into school. After matric, she had a teenage pregnancy just shortly before she entered matric. And so, you know, faced all the challenges that come with that sort of situation. And then which also narrowed opportunities beyond grade 12. And then she says somehow she managed to find this program. It was called Indoni at the time, to be It looked for students who hadn't gone to university, who might be interested in learning dance and being dancers later on in life. It was only when she started actually performing African dance that she connected with her grandmother. And it was at that point that she says, while she was dancing, she could feel the spirit of her grandmother. And that's when they started having a conversation about the her direction in life and what she has to do and what potential she's holding. And even at that point, she always emphasizes that it was not because she had any superpowers or that she was special. It's that there's this vehicle, which is African dance, and that is characterized by Ubuntu and Isintu, that connects her to this other side of the world. So I hope that answers your question, but that's how they explained it.
Thanks, Sua. I'm going, and thanks, Vanessa, for yeah. Israel, apologies. I know you had your hand up, and I missed it. So Israel, what we'll do is we'll hand over to you for you to pose your comment or question, and then we'll hear a response from I'm not sure if it's towards Famada or to Sua, but what you can do is, Famada, if it's not to you, you can also respond thereafter to Veda's question that's in the chat. Is that okay? I'm going to apologize in
Yeah.
advance. I do have to leave at 2:15 to collect my daughter, otherwise she'll be on her own at the school gate. I'm very happy for this to keep going, so I'll leave it open, and Veda's going to manage it. Okay, thanks. So,
All right.
Israel, over to you.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you.
Hi, Israel. I've allowed your mic. Do you want to try unmute yourself quick? Oh. Israel, would you want to maybe, I think we're struggling to hear you. Would you prefer to maybe write in the chat and we can ask?
Oh, yeah. Now
Oh, there we go.
I'm unmuted. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much to all the presenters. I think you did a fantastic job there. I just wanted to comment on this one. I mean, I was intrigued when Siwe, you especially under the methodology that you indicated that you just cancelled like the participant observer thing there, because generally in social sciences and related fields, we tend to study, what we are or part of. And therefore, I totally agree with that approach. Safe to say that it's always important to just establish, the positionality of the researcher, so that because we know we can't run away from this subjectivity, because we are all part of the reality that we are investigating. Yeah, just to add on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Israel.
Thanks, Israel. Israel is one of our senior researchers in our Botswanan team, so it's lovely to have you here. I know that all of our teams are extremely busy today. Famada, do you want to take the next question?
Yeah. That's quite an interesting question. So the question is, I would love to hear what Famada's thoughts are on how Siwe's approach to care and Ubuntu could look like in practice by NGO partners and older persons. I think that it has to start off with a conversation around readiness, and how that could be useful within the context of the NGO partner and the older persons within their space. So, as I was reading this question, I was just thinking about, what would this look like at TAFTA? We are a multicultural organization, so I think you'd have to understand where is the application of this approach, and then look at who are the people that would be interested in adopting this approach. So within the TAFTA context, for example, we have what we call wellness activity coordinators. And these are activity coordinators that look at ways in which to engage with older people. So I would think that they are the best placed people to adopt some of these approaches. However, I think people have to be conscientized into these concepts. And I think there has to be conversations with the people who are facilitating these kinds of approaches to look at how it could be applicable. But having said that, I think, we see you spoke about this within the African context, but I think dance has meaning even in other contexts as well. Even traditional Indian dance, when you think about the religious dances, it's about connecting to spirituality. And there is the movement, and people feel moved, and they call it different things in different religions, whether it's in a trance state or whatever it is. But there is this means of communicating that is centered around yourself and how you express yourself. So I think that there probably is more commonality across the different cultures where dance is involved than I know of, and maybe it's something to look at, within the multicultural context of South Africa. Here's a concept that you bring in. How applicable is this to the Indian group? How applicable is it in different contexts? And how do we find that thread of commonality? Because that's what I would need. As a practitioner, I would say, okay, how do I take what you've learned and what is so useful? How do I take that and apply it within the context of Tafta Durban, and how does that add value to the conversations with our older persons in the sector? I want to end off by saying that I think that the issue around spirituality and our intervention points is possibly something that we overlook when we think about professional intervention. We're sort of driven by this thing that you have to have the sort of evidence, but evidence as it has been thought to us in terms of Western constructs, and that's something that maybe we need to think about as well. I'm going to stop talking now. Otherwise, I'll have you guys here till 4 o'clock.
So if I may add, thanks,
Yes,
Martha, and
please.
I'm actually going to add to what you're saying by using a current example. So as Elena mentioned, I am a part of an NGO called GAPA, which stands for Grandmothers Against Poverty and AIDS. It's based in Khayelitsha, and it's a network of seniors clubs all across the metropolitan area. And there's a lot of capacity building, there's cooking, there's after-school programs, and there's occupational therapy and sewing classes. So quite a lot of projects happening. And over the years, we've had funding, but when COVID happened, things started changing. So we are in a financial crisis, right? And we have been in a financial crisis prior to COVID, which we averted somehow. And we're again at it. So one of the things that Ubuntu necessarily implies is unity. You cannot bring to people's fore Ubuntu without also really asking them to be united. That's really what is at the center. And so when people have a common cause to unite against or to unite for, then, there's usually a lot of potential. So I think from Veda's question around how these approaches that I talk about can be in practice in the NGO, this is this is my answer to it. So this financial crisis we're experiencing at GAPA, in one of the meetings, we noted that actually most of the seniors clubs usually started with a prayer before the business of the day. And us as the board, we just go, we just follow the formalities, we just start. And then the grannies said, this doesn't seem right. Maybe it's because we don't actually unite in intention. and bring our spiritualities to the fore so that we can deal with this. So I think the very first thing with NGOs is it doesn't have to be about dance. It doesn't have to be about prayer or meditation. But there are things that people do that can be healing, that can be beneficial in however way, but can also be uniting. And I think that's really the message I wanted to say. And if those things, particularly in our context in South Africa, are encouched within Ubuntu, I think we have a real shot at making a meaningful difference for the people that need these kinds of intervention the most, you know. And so that's my answer. And I just want to thank Israel for the comment. The reason I said that, and if I may expand, is that in social sciences, as you know, like your anthropologists and your sociologists, often voyeurs, they stand and watch and then they document and then they'll go report, you know, because they don't want to sully their findings and all of that. But if I had adopted that stance as a researcher, the practical implications would have been that I must leave behind my Africanness, because I cannot deny the fact that I'm a Black South African who is interested in understanding this, who also has a vested interest because of my own upbringing and experience. So I had to bring that there, and I explained to them that I'm actually drawn to dance, even though I cannot dance to save my life, but I am drawn to it because my grandmother did this as a empowering tool for young children in my village. And what I did not know then, but now I know, is that she also gave me a tool for self-healing. As I said in my slides earlier, that stress is something that we all experience, and there's no doctor in the world that diagnoses people with stress. They usually will say you're stressed, but there's no medication for it, you know? So, and then I remembered my grandmother had empowered me with a tool to deal with stress, even though she didn't put it like that. And so really what I'm saying is that NGOs also need to go to the elderly, well, the ones that work with the elderly anyway, ask them, how did you deal with stress? How does your community deal with stress? How do they understand it? What opportunities, what occupations can we use? So I'll stop there. As Femade said, I'll also talk forever.
I'm first apologizing for not having my camera on. My Wi-Fi is very spotty today. I apologize, but I want to give the sincerest thank you to Famada and Ziwe. It's a privilege for us to have such brilliant thinkers in our country. Speaking to everyone else in the room, I know that some people have left. I'm so surprised so many people are still here, but we had, I think Bukle from GAPA was here. We've had some government officials, and as a program, we are just extremely grateful for your contribution. This will go onto our YouTube as well if anybody is interested in sharing it. And we really look forward to future collaborations. This is only a year and a half in, just under a year and a half into the official launch of the Family Caregiving Program. We've got 5 years in total, so we really look forward to more engagement. Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. And thank you to the audience as well for the brilliant questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. I hope you have a great weekend, and we look forward to many more of these. And if you look on our website, everyone can see what we have next lined up. We have a jam-packed year.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Please enjoy the rest of your weekend. Veta,